In the European elections of June 1984, voter turnout either declined or remained stagnant in all community states except Denmark, which saw a 5% increase in participation. This outcome was catastrophic for the aspirations of the European Parliament, the destiny of the draft Treaty on European Union, and all those who had hoped that the EP would gain greater democratic legitimacy from its direct election. The actual turnout was not the primary cause for concern. Instead, what was disconcerting was the low level of public awareness of the EP and the purpose of the elections. According to successive Eurobarometer polls, this awareness was even lower than during comparable periods in the pre-1979 election era. This was a significant setback for those who had campaigned for a higher turnout since 1982. They had convincingly argued that a poor turnout would undermine the EP's credibility and its claim for an increase in its powers. Despite this, no specific number was set for what would be considered a satisfactory turnout level. It was simply hoped that between the first and second direct elections, the visibility and comprehensibility of the European Parliament to the electorate would increase enough to persuade voters of the necessity of voting. However, this hope was based on several assumptions that were not fulfilled. The majority of these assumptions were founded on the belief that increased media coverage of the EP would result in higher voter turnout. It was anticipated that media exposure of the elected members of the European Parliament's endeavours would surge, causing individuals to associate positive developments in the European community and their benefits with their chosen representatives. It was also expected that the MEPs could create a career path in the EP, seek re-election, and campaign promoting their accomplishments. And yet, all of these presuppositions depended on the EP's reputation enhancing and public knowledge of and support for it growing, rather than staying the same or decreasing after the inaugural elections in 1979. Regarding the strategic communication of the European Parliament, European election information programs were organized by the European Commission in Brussels and the EP through their national press and information offices in 1977, 1978 and 1979. These programs aimed to make people, most notably opinion leaders, aware of the EP's existence, organization, composition and functions. Whatever the strengths and the weaknesses of the various EEIPs, they were seen as a one-time exercise for the first European elections. Henceforth, it was anticipated that while the institutions would continue their normal information activities, they would have less of a role in the EP elections. It was assumed that the political parties would be the main actors in the second EP elections, and that they would take on the task of mobilizing voters, which is typically associated with political parties in elections. Indeed, the political groups represented in the EP had insisted that they would assume these functions and had sought funding accordingly. Notwithstanding, there were only limited EEIPs in 1984, and some media advertising was undertaken by the national EP offices. Yet, as before, such efforts were insufficient to counteract negative press and television coverage about the EP in the pre-campaign and campaign periods. Additionally, they were not enough to make individuals who were unaware of the EP and MEPs conscious of them, their record, performance, manifestos and aspirations. Similar to the 1979 elections, the activities of the Confederation of Socialist Parties, CSP, the European People's Party, EPP, and the European Liberals and Democrats, ELD, were the most significant in 1984. However, some other political parties developed transnational linkages and created rudimentary electoral material. The most notable of these were, as in what follows, the alliance between the Dutch Democraten 66, the Danish Radikale Venstre, the French Mouvement de Radicaux de Gauche, and the Greek Koma Demokratikou Socialismou, and the Green Alliance that formed after much internal division and dissent, but eventually won sufficient votes to enter the EP. After discussions in working groups, the transnational federations drafted common manifestos and helped organize electoral events, such as the EPP's boat that cruised up and down the Rhine, and the ELD train that traversed some EC member states. Many MEPs in the EP's party groups expected that there would be some common campaign issues throughout the 10. In fact, they and National Party delegates were both involved in the campaign deliberations of transnational party federations. In February 1984, the EP adopted the draft treaty establishing a European Union. Supporters of the treaty hoped that this would be the catalyst of a far-reaching debate on a highly controversial and vexed question of institutional reform in the EC. They believed that unless EC decision-making procedures were fundamentally changed, the EC would be unable to pursue effective policies in a range of socio-economic, international, security and defense areas. And also they believed that it could be a central issue for the election campaign as it dealt with the future of the EC. They saw it as a chance to engage voters on the topic of European integration and believed it could be a unifying issue for the election. The media, on behalf of some political parties, emphasized budgetary concerns and criticized the United Kingdom's perceived lack of commitment to the European project. At the same time, the draft EUT was presented to national parliaments to draw attention to a common electoral issue, and there was a discreet revival of the idea of a two-tier EC. It was widely believed that the UK would be placed in the second or third tier along with Denmark and Greece, two other countries seen as reluctant to fully embrace European integration. The EP party coalitions attempted to project and relate common election issues based on their party-specific ideologies. The CSP manifesto preamble, for instance, stated that the EC was a supplementary instrument for the realization of European socialist goals of social justice, solidarity and freedom. We need a fraternal Europe of the people, not a commercial and technocratic Europe. The 1984 elections can contribute to this transformation. However, the British Labour Party and Danish Social Democrats distanced themselves from the calls to increase the EP's influence. The ELD's manifesto, titled Pour une Europe libérale et démocratique, was adopted in December 1983 at Munich by 11 parties from 9 member states, excluding Ireland. It was twice the length of the CSP manifesto and was organized into 5 main chapters, covering a wide range of topics that had been debated during the campaign period. The ELD emphasized the importance of progress towards a European Union based on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The manifesto opened with references to both topical debates, such as the budget crisis and the supposed major common election issue, the European Union, whilst also addressing various themes, including the common agricultural policy, energy, security, and the economy. The Christian Democrats, like the Liberals, have a strong pro-integrationist heritage, which they sought to exploit during the election campaign. The European Union, which was launched in Rome from April the 2nd to the 4th, 1984, was at the forefront of the EPP campaign when the EPP Congress adopted an action program for the EP's second term of office. The introduction of the action program highlights the need for a European Union and united action in a variety of areas. Subsequent chapters of the program focus on general themes such as jobs, justice, civil rights, peace, and democracy, similar to the CSP and ELD manifestos. The importance of coordination by the 10 to avoid national policy initiatives from being negated, especially in the economic sector, is also emphasized. The section on social policy stresses the consequences of micro and information technology, advocates for more worker co-determination, calls for strengthening the social fund and EC labour legislation, and advocates measures to prevent job creation from having adverse effects on the environment, the third world, and underprivileged groups. In spite of the efforts to promote an EU-centric discussion in national public spheres, national issues seemed to overshadow the European dimension in the EP election. Although the elections were about electing MEPs to the European Parliament, few viewed the results in terms of changes within the Strasbourg chamber. Accordingly, the elections appeared more like mid-term referendums on national governments. During the first half of 1984, parties were mainly focused on their national issues, with little attention paid to the European elections. Denmark was the only country where the EC was a campaign issue, and the election became a second referendum on Danish community membership, with pro-EC and anti-EC parties polarizing. The issue of withdrawal from the EC was a live topic in Denmark, which may have contributed to the slightly higher turnout compared to 1979. In the other 9 member states, the primary focus was on how voters would express confidence in their national government's economic and security policies. The main opposition parties in Greece, France, Belgium, the Netherlands and West Germany aimed to show the extent to which their respective governing parties had lost the confidence of the voters. None of the governments were concerned that the European election results would cause them to lose power. On the other side, the European elections in Greece were fought as fiercely as a general election campaign, but this was not the case in other countries. In the 1984 European Parliament elections, significant political changes took place across Europe. In France, the left-wing parties saw a decline in their support, while the Communist Party suffered a defeat. At the same time, the extreme right made significant gains. In West Germany, the Free Democrats lost all their seats in the European Parliament due to corruption scandals, failing to meet the 5% electoral threshold. However, the West German Greens managed to achieve representation in Strasbourg for the first time. In Italy, the Communist Party achieved equality with the Christian Democrats for the first time, while Bettino Craxi's Socialist Party failed to improve its electoral percentage. Meanwhile, the Labour Party in the UK made a recovery from their 1983 general election defeat. During the election campaigns, various national issues dominated the public debate. In France, there were heated discussions between the private and public sectors over matters such as liberties, educational reforms, industrial and employment policies. In West Germany, concerns were raised about whether the FDP and the Greens would manage to secure the 5% share of the vote needed to win seats. Likewise, national issues such as the P2 scandal involving the Masonic Lodge and the midterm referendum on the Spandolini government were at the forefront of the public discourse in Italy. The deployment of cruise missiles became a hot topic in the Netherlands, capturing the headlines and securing television coverage. While this issue was not directly related to EC matters, it became an electoral issue. Finally, in Greece, the European Parliament elections were seen as a significant test of the socialist government's popularity and an opportunity to debate Greece's recent accession to the EC. In most member states, including the United Kingdom, continued membership in the EC was taken for granted, given the party's strong commitment to European integration. However, Denmark, like the UK, referred to the common market rather than the EC and was the only country with a party campaigning against EC membership. National issues were also at the forefront of the debate in Ireland and Belgium. In Luxembourg, the indivisibility of national and EC concerns was emphasized due to the coincidence of the EP and general election. Given the apparent absence of common European election issues throughout the member states, it is not surprising that the results should be interpreted in national terms, mainly as swings against national governments. But one of the basic problems of the European community and its parliament was the lack of visibility. Although direct elections made the composition of the European Parliament more democratic, the public still lacked understanding of its role. The problems of improving interest in the European Parliament, dispelling myths about it, and combating its poor image, as well as mobilizing a largely apathetic or ignorant electorate, proved to be tremendous. The widespread media characterization of the European Parliament as an impotent talking shop was hardly prone to overcome public indifference. The overall effect was to undermine voters' sense of political efficacy, at a time when awareness of the European Parliament's and MEPs' records was low, and awareness of continual and seemingly insoluble EC crisis was high. The 1984 European elections took place in a context where member governments lacked the political will for any significant transfer of power to the European Parliament. Despite this, voter turnout was surprisingly high, However, without being able to fully exercise its formal powers, the Parliament had limited ability to raise its public profile and gain greater legitimacy. As a result, the elections did not have a significant impact on the politics of the community. Instead, they served more as a reflection of the popularity of member state governments rather than a true assessment of the balance of power between political parties in the European Parliament. Overall, the 1984 elections were more akin to a series of national referendums than a truly community-wide verdict.
Cambiado ahora las reglas con el Acta Única Europea que va a entrar en vigor actualmente, y eso va a tener un efecto sensacional en los poderes y en la responsabilidad del Parlamento.